this is kind of going back along with your talk on the structure and how we jump between New York and Burundi. But as we see Deo starting to take philosophy classes and question why the events took place, we found that he wasn't really getting any answers. And we were in the same boat as him since he was the narrator in the first part. But we only really start to question how these events came about taking place as after we study the history. So we were wondering if this was coincidence or did you plan this from the beginning?
Well, there's always a place where, you know, something like this has to be done. I mean, you have to explain a bunch of stuff to the reader. Maybe you don't want to do it in just one place. Maybe you want to insinuate it. I knew there was going to be a place where I had to talk about this ethnic division in Burundi and what is known and what I knew about the history of it. It's tremendously complicated and it's vexed because it became in itself, this is a really interesting example of history having been mobilized for political ends. Mobilized and distorted grotesquely. And many times throughout the colonial period and the post-colonial period in Burundi and Rwanda, it's just been utterly mangled. And even the history of this war. I have a young Burundian friend who is really, he did something very interesting. He found all these books written in French by Burundians who had been participants in the Civil War that were, he said, they're very badly written, they weren't widely, they were just somehow published, and I don't even know their publication history, no one had much bought them, they're pretty expensive, but he bought up, he's a student here in the States, and he bought up as many of these as he could and read them. And he started putting together a picture of what had happened. That is vastly more complicated than most Western historians even have begun to imagine, it seems to me. And but there's a line there that Deo uses near the end of somewhere where he says, this is not like a football match, you know, one side here, the other side there. No, it's a chaos. And everybody's view of something, of events like this depends on where you were and, you know, who you are and so on. But I you know, and I had this is always the case, I had a much longer explanation. I felt that when we got to Burundi, when I'm traveling to Burundi with him, that was the place for most of this. But then I had to cut it back. It just was a big roadblock in this story, and I threw some of it back into a sort of appendix. But I still don't pretend to understand this fully, the deep origins of it. We don't have pre-colonial records, not very many anyway. There's memories of what people were told and so on and so forth, but and we have more of that for Rwanda than we do for Burundi, I think. And more work has been done by historians and anthropologists and so on. I'm not sure I trust all of the ones whom I've read, though. Really, they seem to take sides. It's curious. But anyway, you know, I think that kind of information is important, but you also have to find the right sort of balance for it. A better example of one that I could talk about a little more easily, because I understand it better, was when I was writing about Paul Farmer, I had to talk about the antibiotic resistance in tuberculosis, the development of it and so on. And I didn't understand it. And I was surprised to talk to some clinicians who, it turns out, really didn't understand it either. But it's not all that hard to understand, but I talked to a whole bunch of people and microbiologists and read and so on, and I bored everybody anywhere near in sight by explaining it, and then I wrote these really long explanations in the book, and in the end my editor talked me into cutting it all down to a few sentences. One thing about doing that kind of work along the way is that you can at least be pretty sure that those few sentences are accurate.